My ex-husband funded his mistress's plot to destroy me. Now they're both in prison and still trying to ruin my life. When I married Martin, I believed we were a team. I was fresh off a major career milestone, and Martin was thriving in his tech job. We both had goals, dreams, and a shared vision for the future. Or so I thought. Things started to shift 2 years into our marriage. Martin was laid off, and while I understood it wasn't his fault, his approach to the situation concerned me. He didn't actively look for new opportunities. Instead, he seemed perfectly content living off my inheritance, a sizable sum left to me by my late grandmother, who'd been a pillar of strength in my life. I didn't complain, at least not initially. My grandmother raised me to be generous and understanding, especially toward those I cared about. But as months turned into a year, and then 2, resentment began to simmer. Complicating matters was Martin's 22-year-old daughter, Claire, from a previous relationship. When Martin lost his job, Claire temporarily moved in with us. At first, I was happy to help. Claire had been struggling financially and needed a place to stay while getting back on her feet. But her presence quickly turned from a favor into a disruption. Claire treated our home like her personal playground. She'd blast music at all hours, leave dishes piled in the sink, and spend money on designer clothes while borrowing from my pantry because she couldn't afford groceries. Martin, rather than setting boundaries, doted on her like she could do no wrong. The breaking point came one evening when I came home early from work. I entered quietly, hoping to surprise Martin with a small gift, tickets to a local jazz show he'd mentioned months ago. Instead, I found Claire and Martin sitting in the living room, laughing hysterically. "You should have seen her face," Claire giggled, mimicking a high-pitched voice. "Oh, Martin, are you sure we can afford this? We have to be careful with my inheritance money." Martin snorted. "She acts like she's the queen of budgeting. Honestly, it's her only personality trait these days." Well, that and guilt tripping me about the job. My heart sank. I stepped back, unnoticed, and my mind reeled. Was this how they saw me? As nothing more than a bank account with legs? It got worse. Claire leaned closer to Martin, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "So, about the plan, you think she'll buy it?" Martin hesitated, glancing toward the doorway. "She's gullible, but we have to be careful. If we play our cards right, your fake pregnancy will secure the rest of the money. Once the trust is broken, it's ours for good." I froze. Fake pregnancy? My money? What the hell was going on? My grandmother's inheritance included a trust fund designated for family emergencies with strict clauses for its use. Martin had always known about it, and while I'd occasionally dipped into it for home repairs or medical expenses, I'd never touched the majority. Apparently, they had other plans. As I stood there, trying to process the betrayal, I knew I couldn't confront them outright. Not yet. If they were willing to go this far, what else might they be capable of? I slipped out of the house and sat in my car, shaking with anger. My mind raced with questions. How long had they been plotting? And why did Martin, the man who had once promised to cherish and protect me, stoop so low? One thing was clear. I needed a plan of my own. The betrayal cut deep, but I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I spent that night tossing and turning, replaying their conversation in my head. Confronting them immediately would only tip them off. I needed proof, leverage, and a way to protect my inheritance from their grubby hands. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. Over breakfast, I smiled and asked Martin about his plans for the day. Claire chimed in about her job search and how she was getting so close to a breakthrough. I nodded, playing the supportive wife and stepmother, all while my stomach churned. As soon as they left the house, Claire heading to the gym and Martin claiming he had errands, I got to work. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. My grandmother's inheritance had stipulations, and while I wasn't fully aware of all the details, I knew the trust fund had legal protections. My lawyer, Mr. Patel, was sharp and had helped set up the trust years ago. "Rachel, it's good to hear from you," he greeted me warmly. "What's the matter?" I explained the situation as carefully as I could without breaking down. By the end, Mr. Patel was silent for a moment. "This is serious," he finally said. "If they're planning to falsify a pregnancy to access the trust, that's fraud. You're the sole trustee, But if you authorize a withdrawal under false pretenses, you could be held liable. I hadn't even thought about that. What should I do? First, document everything. Any conversations, emails, or messages, gather them. Second, consider hiring a private investigator. If they're conspiring like this, there may be a digital trail. Third, don't confront them yet. Let's build a case to protect you legally and financially. The thought of hiring a private investigator felt extreme, but I knew he was right. I thanked him and promised to stay in touch. That evening, while Martin and Claire were distracted watching some reality show, I slipped into the office. Martin had a desktop computer he rarely used, but it was still logged into his email and messaging accounts. I started with his emails, scrolling through mundane messages about warranties and newsletters. But then, I found a folder labeled Personal. Inside were email exchanges between Martin and Claire. My stomach turned as I read messages like, "We'll need a convincing ultrasound. Do you know anyone who can fake one? Once the trust is liquidated, we'll say the pregnancy ended due to complications. She'll be too heartbroken to question it. Remember, the story has to be airtight. Rachel can't suspect a thing." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept reading, screenshotting everything and saving it onto a flash drive. Next, I checked Martin's text messages. He and Claire had been discussing their scheme in detail. There were even text exchanges about buying a fake belly and forging medical records, bringing in the experts. The next day, I hired a private investigator named Sarah. She came highly recommended and had a no-nonsense attitude that immediately reassured me. "Don't worry, Rachel," she said after I explained the situation. "If they've left any kind of evidence, I'll find it. We'll make sure they don't get away with this." Sarah's investigation didn't take long. Within a week, she had compiled a damning report. Claire had been in contact with someone who specialized in counterfeit documents, and Martin had even put down a deposit for a fake ultrasound image. They'd been meticulous in planning every detail, but they hadn't covered their tracks. Living with them during this time was excruciating. Claire's smugness seemed to grow daily, and Martin acted as if he were already in control of my inheritance. They had no idea I was onto them, and I intended to keep it that way. The hardest moment came when Claire casually mentioned her boyfriend. "Oh, Rachel, you'll love him," she said over dinner one night. "He's so supportive and understanding. He even suggested I take better care of myself, for when I have kids one day." Martin chuckled. "She's got great instincts. Must have inherited them from me." I smiled tightly, my knuckles white as I gripped my fork. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to throw their betrayal in their faces. But I stayed quiet, reminding myself that their day of reckoning was coming. Patience was the key. I knew their scheme would unravel faster if I let them think they were winning. Armed with the evidence Sarah and I had gathered, I began crafting a plan to expose them. My goal wasn't just to protect my inheritance. I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One evening, Claire excitedly announced she had big news. Martin grinned like a proud father as she stood in front of us, her hand resting on her flat stomach. "I'm pregnant," she declared, her eyes gleaming with fake emotion. I forced myself to gasp, playing the shocked and delighted stepmother. "Oh my goodness, Claire. That's wonderful news." Martin wrapped her in a bear hug, turning to me with a look of triumph. "See, Rachel, our family's growing. Isn't this incredible?" It took everything in me to keep smiling, but I managed. "Absolutely. This calls for a celebration." I suggested we throw a family dinner the following weekend. Martin and Claire eagerly agreed, completely unaware of my ulterior motive. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly to organize the event. I invited close friends and family, including Martin's parents and Claire's estranged mother. I even reached out to a few of my late grandmother's old friends, people who had known me since childhood and were deeply invested in the legacy she had left me. Meanwhile, I secretly contacted my lawyer and Sarah, letting them know my plan. They both agreed it was risky, but supported me in moving forward. "Make sure you have all your evidence ready," Mr. Patel warned. "If this blows up, you'll need to stay calm and let the facts speak for themselves." The evening of the dinner arrived, and the house was filled with laughter and chatter. Martin was in his element, boasting about how excited he was to become a grandfather. Claire soaked up the attention, even showing off a fake ultrasound photo she had brought along. I stayed in the background, observing their interactions and noting how confident they seemed. They genuinely believed they were fooling everyone. After dinner, I stood up to make a toast. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, raising my glass. "It's been a challenging few months, but having you here reminds me of the importance of family and honesty." Martin and Claire exchanged nervous glances at my emphasis on honesty, but they quickly recovered. "I also want to share some exciting news," I continued. "As you all know, my grandmother's trust has been a significant part of our family's legacy. Recently, I've had to take extra precautions to ensure it's protected." The room fell silent, the mood shifting as everyone sensed something was coming. "And tonight," I said, turning to Martin and Claire, "I'd like to address a few things directly, exposing the truth." I pulled out a folder containing the evidence Sarah had compiled. Calmly, I laid out their scheme in front of everyone. The emails, the texts, the fake ultrasound, and even the payments Claire had made to a counterfeit document specialist. Gasps filled the room as I explained how they had planned to manipulate me into releasing funds from the trust under false pretenses. Martin's face turned ashen, and Claire's smug demeanor crumbled. "This is insane," Claire shouted, her voice shaking. "You're making this up." "Am I?" I shot back, holding up the fake ultrasound photo she had shown earlier. "Because this doesn't match the one you sent to your friend," for approval. Claire froze, unable to respond. Martin tried to intervene. "Rachel, you're blowing this out of proportion. We're family. We can work this out privately." "Family?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "You were willing to destroy my trust in you for money. That's not family." Claire bolted from the room, her face red with humiliation. Martin followed her, mumbling excuses to the stunned guests. I stayed behind, fielding questions and accepting words of support from everyone who remained. Later that night, I received a call from Martin. "You've ruined everything," he yelled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've protected myself," I replied coldly, "and I suggest you get a good lawyer. You'll need one." The dinner party had been a success, but the fallout was swift and chaotic. Word spread quickly through our family and social circles about what had transpired. Claire and Martin went into damage control mode, though their efforts were laughable at best. Claire posted a lengthy, dramatic rant on social media, painting herself as the victim of a vicious stepmother who hated her from the start. She claimed I had fabricated everything to destroy her happiness. Meanwhile, Martin called my phone incessantly, leaving a barrage of voicemails ranging from angry tirades to desperate pleas. I ignored them all. A few days later, I received an unexpected visit from Claire's estranged mother, Linda. I hadn't seen her in years, but she looked composed and determined. "Rachel," she said, stepping into my home, "I heard what happened at the dinner party. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "Claire has always been manipulative, but I never imagined she would stoop this low. You did what I never had the courage to do, stand up to her and call her out on her lies." Linda revealed that Claire had a history of using people to get what she wanted. She shared stories of estranged friendships, failed relationships, and even minor legal troubles that had been swept under the rug thanks to Martin's influence. "I knew she'd find a way to drag someone else into her schemes," Linda admitted. "I just didn't think it would be you." Her visit reaffirmed my decision to hold my ground. My lawyer, Mr. Patel, wasted no time filing a restraining order against Claire and Martin. He also initiated legal proceedings to recover any funds Martin had misused during our marriage. Martin, desperate to avoid a court case, began bombarding me with settlement offers. "Please, Rachel," he begged in one message, "let's handle this privately. You don't need to ruin my life." But I was done protecting him. When the court date arrived, the evidence was damning. Not only had Claire fabricated her pregnancy, but it was also revealed that Martin had been funneling money from my inheritance into his private account for months. The judge ruled in my favor, ordering Martin to pay back the stolen funds and granting me full control over my late grandmother's trust. An unexpected ally. During the trial, I noticed someone sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, Sarah. After the hearing, she approached me with an apologetic smile. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she began, "but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how deep their betrayal went until I saw it all laid out." Her sincerity caught me off guard. While I wasn't ready to fully trust her again, I appreciated her courage in admitting her mistakes. With Martin out of my life and my finances secure, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. But as I began to rebuild, a new challenge emerged. One morning, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of me standing outside my lawyer's office, taken just days before the trial. Scrawled across the back were the words, "You think it's over? Watch your back." My heart raced as I stared at the ominous message. Who could have sent it? Was it Claire? Martin? Or someone else entirely? The story wasn't over. Not yet. The photograph haunted me for days. Every time I looked at it, my mind raced with questions. Who took it? What did they mean by "watch your back"? I tried to convince myself it was just a cruel prank, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I shared the photo with my lawyer, Mr. Patel, who immediately urged me to report it to the police. "Whoever sent this could be trying to intimidate you," he said gravely. "It's crucial to take it seriously." At the police station, an officer examined the photograph carefully. They promised to investigate, though they admitted that finding the sender might be difficult without more evidence. I felt a mix of relief and unease. Someone wanted me to stay scared, and it was working. A week later, I noticed something strange. A silver sedan parked across the street from my house. It wasn't a car I recognized, and it seemed to show up at odd hours, early mornings, late nights. One evening, unable to shake my paranoia, I decided to confront the driver. But as I approached, the car sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. I barely caught a glimpse of the figure inside, but my stomach churned when I saw the silhouette. It looked eerily similar to Claire. Could she be behind the threats? Was she so desperate to retaliate after her public humiliation and the court loss? A few days later, Sarah called me. "Rachel, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. When we met at a quiet cafe, Sarah looked pale and nervous. "I think Claire is plotting something," she said. "She's been acting strange, more unhinged than usual. She even mentioned that she'd make you pay for everything." I leaned in closer, my heart pounding. "What do you mean? What is she planning?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I overheard her talking to someone on the phone about getting even. I thought you should know." That night, the silver sedan returned. This time, it parked directly in my driveway. Adrenaline coursed through me as I grabbed my phone to call the police. But before I could, a figure stepped out of the car. It wasn't Claire, it was Martin. He stumbled toward my front door, his face pale and gaunt. "Rachel," he slurred, his voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you." I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock in place. "What do you want, Martin?" I asked coldly. "They're after me," he whispered, his eyes darting around. "I didn't think they'd go this far." "Who's after you?" "Claire and her people," he said. "I thought I could control her, but she's gone rogue. She's dangerous, Rachel. You have to believe me." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Martin, the man who had betrayed me, was now begging for my help. "Why should I believe anything you say?" I shot back. Before he could answer, the sound of shattering glass filled the air. I turned to see a brick lying in my living room, surrounded by shards of my broken window. Attached to the brick was a note. "You can't hide forever." The police arrived minutes later, taking statements and promising to patrol the area. But the sense of safety I'd fought so hard to regain was gone. As I watched Martin being escorted away for questioning, one thought consumed me. If Claire had gone this far, what was she planning next? And could I stop her before it was too late? The following days passed in a haze of tension and fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow outside the window made my heart race. I knew Claire was escalating, but I didn't know how far she was willing to go, or what her ultimate plan was. Then, I received a call from Sarah. "She's gone off the deep end," Sarah said breathlessly. "Claire mentioned something about a meeting, and, Rachel, I think she's planning to hurt you. You need to be careful. The line went dead before I could ask for more details. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. I decided to take matters into my own hands. With the police seemingly unable to act without more evidence, I hired a private investigator, a man named Julian who came highly recommended by my lawyer. Within 2 days, Julian had uncovered Claire's movements. She's rented a cabin about 2 hours from here, he said, sliding over photographs of Claire meeting with 2 rough-looking men. My guess is she's hired some muscle to intimidate you, or worse. The sight of the photos turned my stomach. Claire's vindictiveness had reached a dangerous level. What do we do? I asked, barely able to contain my fear. We set a trap, Julian replied, his expression grim. The plan was simple but risky. Julian would track Claire's next move, while I staged my own disappearance. By making it seem like I was scared enough to flee, we hoped Claire would make a mistake that could be caught on record. I left my house and checked into a small motel under a fake name. Meanwhile, Julian kept surveillance on Claire's cabin. Late one night, he called me. She's leaving the cabin with those 2 men, he said. I think they're heading to your place. My heart pounded in my chest. If I hadn't left, I might have been walking into a trap of my own. Julian coordinated with the police, who set up an undercover team near my house. When Claire and her accomplices arrived, they were caught red-handed attempting to break in. The moment Claire saw the flashing lights, she screamed, "You can't do this to me. She deserves it." The police arrested her and the 2 men, finding evidence in their car that pointed to far more sinister intentions: a set of zip ties, duct tape, and a map with my home circled. I thought the ordeal was over. Claire was facing charges for conspiracy and attempted home invasion, and the police assured me she'd be held accountable. But just when I began to breathe a sigh of relief, another shocking twist emerged. Julian uncovered a link between Claire and Martin. Emails and bank statements revealed that Martin had been funneling money to Claire throughout the divorce and even after. He's been funding her, Julian said, and it looks like he knew about her plans. Martin, the man who had begged for my help, had been playing both sides all along. Armed with this new evidence, I confronted Martin in the police station, where he was being held for questioning. "You knew," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You helped her do all of this." Martin's face turned pale, but he didn't deny it. "She said she'd ruin me if I didn't," he mumbled. "I didn't think she'd go this far. Far enough to try to hurt me?" I shot back. "You're just as guilty as she is." As Martin was led away, I realized that I was finally free. Free of their manipulation, their lies, and their toxicity. Months later, as I rebuilt my life, I received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked from the prison where Claire and Martin were being held. The letter contained just one line. I burned the letter, refusing to let them have any more power over me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that they still had one last move to make.